To the world, she was America's sweetheart. The dancing partner who glided across the silver screen with an effortless grace that seemed to define glamour and joy. Ginger Rogers. Her name alone conjures images of swirling skirts, perfectly in-sync dance steps, and a smile that could light up a theater during the darkest days of the Great Depression. She was the girl next door who became a queen, one half of the most iconic dance duo in movie history. But in the pages of her private, tell-all memoir, Ginger, My Story, published in 1991, she revealed a very different side to that story. It was a story of betrayal, of a dream that so often felt like it was about to become a nightmare. A story of constant battles, of being underestimated, underpaid, and undermined. And at the heart of it all was a shadowy force she battled for decades. This force has been described as a poisonous snake, a venomous presence determined to ruin her career. So, who, or what, was it? Today, we're opening her book to find the truth. We're going on a hunt for the poisonous snake of Ginger Rogers' life. Was it a jealous rival? A controlling lover? Or was it something far bigger, and far more insidious? The answer is more shocking than you might think. Before we get into the shadows, we have to understand the light. To really grasp the secrets Ginger revealed, we have to appreciate the perfect image she was expected to project. Born Virginia Catherine McMath in Independence, Missouri, she was a child of incredible ambition, mostly driven by her powerhouse mother, Lela Rogers. Lela was the ultimate stage mom, a screenwriter and reporter who saw a spark in her daughter and fanned it into a wildfire. The name Ginger actually came from a cousin who couldn't pronounce Virginia, but it stuck, fitting her fiery personality perfectly. Her career didn't start in some polished Hollywood studio, but on the dusty stages of the vaudeville circuit. When she was just 14, she won a Charleston contest in Texas, and the prize was a tour. Lela immediately created a troupe called Ginger and Her Redheads, and they hit the road. It was a grueling life, but it's where Ginger built her resilience and perfected her craft. By 19, she was a Broadway star, introducing Gershwin tunes like Embraceable You in the hit show Girl Crazy. It was there that she first crossed paths with a choreographer's assistant, a guy named Fred Astaire. At the time, it was nothing special. She was the rising star, he was just helping out with some dance numbers. As she later wrote in her memoir, she honestly didn't think of him again. Hollywood came calling, and after a couple of tries with Paramount, she landed at RKO Pictures in the early 1930s. She was quickly typecast as the wisecracking blonde in films like 42 Andy Street and Gold Diggers of 1933. She was good, but she wasn't the star. That all changed in 1933. RKO was making a big musical, Flying Down to Rio, when the second female lead dropped out. Ginger, already under contract, was thrown in. Her dance partner for one number, the karaoke, was that same man from Broadway, Fred Astaire. The movie was supposed to star Dolores Del Rio, but when audiences saw Fred and Ginger dance, they stole the show. Their chemistry was electric. As Katharine Hepburn famously remarked years later, he gives her class, and she gives him sex. RKO saw exactly what they had, the antidote to the Great Depression. A money-making machine. From 1933 to 1939, Fred and Ginger were the biggest stars at RKO, making 9 musicals that defined the era. The Gay Divorcee, Top Hat, Swing Time, each one was a bigger hit than the last. They basically saved RKO from bankruptcy and danced their way into the hearts of millions. Ginger Rogers was now, officially, America's sweetheart. She projected this image of effortless joy, of a life filled with satin and champagne. But behind the scenes, things were a lot more complicated. In her book, she pulls back the curtain on the immense pressure, the backbreaking work, and the constant fight for respect. And it's here, in the cracks of that golden image, that our hunt for the poisonous snake begins. The first, and maybe most obvious, suspect isn't a person, but the Hollywood studio system itself, specifically RKO Pictures. In the Golden Age, studios were factories. They owned the stars, the directors, the scripts, everything. Actors were assets to be moved around for profit. From the moment she became a star, Ginger Rogers felt the weight of that control. While Fred and Ginger were sold to the world as equal partners, behind the scenes, it was a totally different story. Astaire was already an established Broadway star, and he got preferential treatment from day one. In fact, producer Pandro S. Berman had to talk a reluctant Astaire into teaming up with Rogers again after flying down to Rio. Astaire didn't want to be tied to a partner. To convince him, RKO gave him an incredible deal, a percentage of the film's profits, almost unheard of at the time, and complete creative control over the dances. Ginger got no such offer. She was a contract player, an employee. For years, she was paid significantly less than Fred, even though she shared equal screen time and worked just as hard. In her memoir, she wrote about the grueling rehearsals, the endless hours spent perfecting routines until her feet literally bled. Producer Pandro S. Berman even noted her incredible work ethic, saying she spent her Sundays, holidays, and nights rehearsing. Yet, her paycheck didn't reflect any of that. The fight for fair pay became a constant battle. In 1935, during Follow the Fleet, things came to a head. Exhausted and feeling undervalued, Ginger walked out of rehearsals. Through her mother Lela, she demanded a bonus and publicity equal to Astaire's. It was a huge risk. The studio could have just fired her. But they knew her chemistry with Astaire was irreplaceable. They gave in, partially, raising her salary to $2,000 a week. It was a win, but the fight was far from over. The control went beyond money. The studio wanted to keep her in the musical comedy box. They saw her as one half of Fred and Ginger, not as Ginger Rogers, the actress. This drove her crazy. She wanted dramatic roles, a chance to prove she was more than a dancer. She had to fight tooth and nail for every serious part. When she finally got her chance in the 1937 film Stage Door, she was cast opposite RKO's other queen, Katharine Hepburn. She proved she could hold her own, and the role was a huge milestone. But the studio just saw it as a one-off. It was right back to the dance floor for Carefree in 1938.So, was the studio system the poisonous snake? It certainly fits. It was a force that constantly tried to devalue her, control her, and limit her. The system's venom was the idea that she was replaceable, that she was secondary to her male partner, and that her artistic dreams were just an inconvenience. In her own words, she was her own woman, not a creation of any man or studio, and she spent years proving it. The on-screen magic between Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers was undeniable. They were the ideal couple, the fantasy that Depression-era audiences were desperate for. But what was the reality behind the romance? Could the poisonous snake have been hiding inside the partnership itself? Now, to be clear, Ginger Rogers always expressed professional admiration for Fred Astaire. She called him a genius and knew their partnership was special. They weren't enemies. In fact, they both repeatedly denied the rumors that they fought off-screen. They were professionals who worked incredibly hard together, but professional and personal are two very different things. As Ginger herself said, "True, we were never bosom buddies off the screen. We were different people with different interests." He was a reclusive perfectionist obsessed with the dance. She was more outgoing, with interests like sculpture, tennis, and a fierce ambition to be a dramatic actress. The main poison in the partnership came from the work dynamic. Fred was the undisputed creative force behind the dances. He was the choreographer, the teacher, the taskmaster. He was famous for his brutal rehearsal schedules, demanding take after take. Ginger, who had years of professional dance experience from vaudeville but lacked Astaire's formal training, had to work relentlessly to keep up. Astaire himself once said, "All the girls I ever danced with thought they couldn't do it, but of course they could. So they always cried. All except Ginger." No, Ginger never cried. He meant it as a compliment to her toughness, but it shows you the kind of pressure he created, this dynamic. He the master, she the student, fed a public narrative she hated, the idea that he was the genius and she was just along for the ride. The idea that he was her Svengali. She fought against this her whole life. He was not my Svengali, she said firmly. I was my own woman. We were a team. But the perception stuck, fueled by the studio's lopsided pay and publicity. He got the credit and creative control, she got the label of Fred's partner. There were also artistic clashes. The most famous one happened while filming Cheek to Cheek for Top Hat. Ginger had worked with the designer on a stunning gown covered in ostrich feathers. On the first take, the feathers started flying everywhere, all over Fred's tuxedo. He was furious. He said the dress was ruining the number and demanded she change. Ginger loved the dress and knew how beautiful it looked on camera, so she refused. The argument got so heated that producers and the director had to get involved. Ginger stood her ground. Finally, the feathers were sewn on more securely, and they shot the scene. When Astaire saw how it looked on film, he had to admit she was right. The dress was magnificent. He even nicknamed her Feathers and gave her a golden feather charm. But the fight showed the tension under the surface, his total control versus her growing confidence. So, was Fred Astaire the snake? No. But was the partnership, with its built-in inequality and the suffocating public perception it created, a source of toxic pressure? Absolutely. The venom here wasn't personal hate, but the poison of being overshadowed. For a woman as ambitious as Ginger Rogers, that was a bitter pill to swallow. The story of Ginger Rogers is a fascinating look at the light and dark of Hollywood's golden age. It's a tale of ambition, talent, and the relentless fight for recognition. If you're finding this deep dive into classic Hollywood secrets as compelling as I do, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We unravel stories like this every week, and you won't want to miss what we uncover next. Now, let's get back to the investigation. Hollywood in the 1930s and 40s was a glamorous town, but it was also a jungle where everyone was fighting for the spotlight. Competition was fierce, and friendships were often fragile. In her memoir, Ginger painted a picture of a town built on jealousy. So, our next suspect is the very culture of Hollywood itself, embodied by the other powerful women she was pitted against. The most famous rivalry of Ginger's career was with her RKO studio mate, Katharine Hepburn. On paper, they couldn't have been more different. Hepburn was from a wealthy, East Coast intellectual family, a serious dramatic actress. Ginger was the sassy hoofer from Texas, the queen of musicals, but they also had things in common that likely fueled the tension. Both were fiercely independent, ambitious redheads. And, critically, they were both linked to the same powerful men at different times, including director George Stevens and the billionaire Howard Hughes. That overlap in their personal lives definitely created some friction. It also didn't help that Rogers was a lifelong, staunch Republican. While Hepburn was famously and outspokenly liberal, their rivalry supposedly boiled over on the set of the 1937 film Stage Door. The movie, about a house full of aspiring actresses, was the perfect backdrop for their real-life tension. At the time, Hepburn's career was in a slump. She was considered box office poison, while Ginger was at the peak of her fame but desperate to prove her dramatic chops. RKO cast them as roommates who trade witty, barbed insults. According to Rogers's autobiography, the animosity was real. She claimed Hepburn treated her with contempt and that they only spoke when the cameras were rolling. A famous, though possibly embellished, story that Rogers told was that during a disguised audition for Hepburn's film Mary of Scotland, Hepburn saw through the disguise, kicked her in the shins, and swore at her. Hepburn, for her part, always downplayed any feud, though even her denials had a hint of condescension. She once noted how Ginger always made a great fuss about her hair before a scene, subtly positioning herself as the serious artist versus Rogers the vain movie star. It wasn't just Hepburn. The entire star system pitted women against each other. They were all competing for the same few great roles, for the attention of the same producers, and for the title of the studio's biggest star. This culture was its own kind of poison. It created an environment of paranoia and distrust. Every other actress was a potential threat. The poisonous snake in this context wasn't one rival, but the whole system that encouraged women to see each other as enemies. Away from the studios, Ginger Rogers's personal life was its own drama. She was married and divorced 5 times, a fact that stood in stark contrast to the perfect fairy tale romances she acted out on screen. In her memoir, she's surprisingly open about the heartbreak. This brings us to our final suspect, the venom of personal betrayal. Her first marriage at 17 to a dance partner was a youthful mistake. It was her later relationships that left deeper scars. In 1934, she married actor Lou Ayres, but their careers pulled them in opposite directions. The demanding schedule of a top movie star made a normal home life impossible, and the marriage fell apart. Her third marriage, to U.S. Marine Jack Briggs, was also tumultuous, but some of the most telling relationships were the ones that never made it to the altar. Her long romance with the powerful Howard Hughes was a major chapter of her life. He even proposed, but she turned him down after discovering he was cheating on her. The cycle of romance and disappointment continued with her fourth and fifth husbands, French actor Jacques Bergerac and producer William Marshall. Each divorce was a public event, analyzed by fans who expected her to be living the fairy tale. In her memoir, Ginger doesn't really place blame. She just recounts a pattern of disappointment. The men in her life often couldn't handle her. Fame, or their own ambitions clashed with hers. The venom of a broken heart is a powerful thing. For a woman who held deeply traditional values, the failure of 5 marriages must have been a profound source of pain. While she was dancing with Fred Astaire in a world where love always won, her own reality was far more lonely and painful. The snake's venom here was the slow poison of loneliness and the realization that the romantic ideal she sold to millions was, for her, tragically out of reach. So we started this journey with a dramatic claim, that Ginger Rogers confessed everything about a poisonous snake who tried to ruin her. We've looked at the suspects, the oppressive studio, her complicated partnership with Fred Astaire, the jealous Hollywood jungle, and the heartbreak in her personal life. After digging into her memoir, Ginger, My Story, and the history of that time, the truth is clear. The hunt for a single person she called a poisonous snake is pointless. That specific phrase seems to be a modern dramatization for a YouTube title, not a direct quote from her book. There is no passage where she points a finger and uses those exact words, but if you dismiss the idea just because the words aren't there, you miss the entire point of her story. The poisonous snake wasn't one person. The poisonous snake was all of it. It was the systemic misogyny of the studio system that told her she was worth less than her male co-star. It was the condescending attitude of a town that wanted to keep her in a box, refusing to see the Oscar-winning actress she fought to become. The snake's venom was in the public story that she was just Fred Astaire's creation, not a powerhouse talent in her own right who worked until her feet bled. It was in the icy stares from rivals and a culture that turned women into competitors. It was in the sting of failed marriages and the loneliness of a life lived in a fishbowl. The poisonous snake was the entire toxic ecosystem of Golden Age Hollywood. It was the endless fight for every dollar, for every serious role, for every ounce of respect. Ginger Rogers spent her entire career doing everything Fred Astaire did, but as the famous saying goes, she did it backwards and in high heels. And she did it while fighting off snakes. Her memoir isn't the story of one great betrayal. It's the story of 1,000 small cuts, and the incredible resilience it took to survive in that kind of environment. In the end, Ginger Rogers's greatest role wasn't in Top Hat or even her Oscar-winning performance in Kitty Foyle. Her greatest role was that of Ginger Rogers, the survivor. She navigated a treacherous industry with grace, grit, and an unshakable belief in her own worth. Her book, Ginger, My Story, isn't just a celebrity memoir, it's a testament to her strength. While the poisonous snake isn't a literal quote, the feeling behind it is woven into every chapter of her life. The venom she faced was real, and her triumph over it is what makes her story so powerful. She refused to be just a dancer. She refused to be paid less. She refused to be anyone's creation but her own, proving that she was, and always had been, a star in her own right. The next time you watch her glide across the screen with that radiant smile, remember the battles she fought to get there. Remember the strength behind the glamour and the iron will beneath the satin gowns. And now I want to ask you, does knowing the full story, the constant struggles she faced, change how you see Ginger Rogers and the golden age of Hollywood? Let me know what you think in the comments below.